Chapter 1821. He looked at Gu Xingyin, his black eyes twinkling with starlight. Gu Xingyin looked at him. Her mouth opened and closed, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she stood up. He walked to Gu Xingyin's side and leaned down. His aura enveloped her. Gu Xingyin heard the man's voice in her ear. "Can I hug you, Minming?" There was a touch of cautiousness in his words that even he didn't know. Gu Xingyin took the initiative to raise her hand and put it around his waist. Then she found that her whole vision had changed. A strong force pulled her up from her seat, and she was tightly held in the man's arms. Guan Hanting lowered his eyes. His eyes were filled with joy. "Today must be my lucky day." Gu Xingyin smiled. "I think so too. It's a surprise." Maybe it was Guan Hanting's character. Although the two of them confirmed their relationship tonight, they didn't do anything extra after this simple hug. Guan Hanting sent her to the school gate. Gu Xingyin got out of the car and walked to the school. After walking for a while, she suddenly turned around. Sure enough, the man was still standing there, looking at her. Gu Xingyin glanced at the students of a university who were walking around, and suddenly ran toward Guan Hanting. Then, under Guan Hanting's astonished gaze, she slammed into his arms. Some students nearby saw this scene, and many of them looked over curiously. Among them, some people had already recognized Guan Hanting and Zhang Yu. After all, the two of them were not unknown figures in the school. "Why are you?" Guan Hanting hugged Gu Xingyin tightly. The warmth of the person in his arms made him reluctant to let go. Gu Xingyin said sullenly, "I couldn't help it when you stood here alone and watched me walk away." Guan Hanting heard this and laughed. He reached out and stroked Gu Xingyin's hair. "All right, don't be so reluctant. We still have a long future ahead of us. You have to go back to the dormitory." He slowly loosened his embrace. Gu Xingyin looked at the man opposite her seriously. "Will you miss me?" she asked softly. Guan Hanting was stunned. He reached out his hand and helped Gu Xingyin tuck her hair away from her cheek. Then he admitted helplessly, "Yes." "Then why are you still letting me go?" Gu Xingyin looked at her and suddenly smiled. It was completely different from the youthful and delicate feeling she usually gave off. There seemed to be a different kind of charm hidden in this smile. Guan Hanting only felt that there were two little hooks in her eyes, causing his heart to stir. His gaze suddenly darkened. Gu Xingyin was very satisfied with the effect he had created. She leaned closer to Guan Hanting and whispered in his ear, "Couples can be more intimate." Guan Hanting's body stiffened. Then, Gu Xingyin felt that her eyes were covered by a pair of warm hands. The other party gritted his teeth and said helplessly, "Be a good girl and go back to the dormitory." Gu Xingyin blinked and removed the hands covering her eyes. She couldn't help laughing out loud. Guan Hanting looked at her with forbearance and indulgence. When he noticed the smile in the other party's eyes, he knew that his little girl was deliberately teasing him. Guan Hanting looked down as he watched her figure walk away. "When the time comes, I will let you know." What did she mean by men are not to be teased? Chapter 1822. When Gu Xingyin returned to the dormitory, she was met with Song Wanwan's gossipy gaze. Song Wanwan looked at her suggestively. "Aren't you going to tell me something?" Gu Xingyin looked at her calmly and nodded. "We're together." Song Wanwan. She was just gossiping. She never expected to find out about something so important. She looked at Gu Xingyin with excitement. When did this happen? It's really too shocking. She never thought that her roommate would really pluck Mr. Guan, the untouchable flower. Gu Xingyin still looked calm. "Just now." Song Wanwan reacted immediately. "Just now? Did Teacher Guan just confess to you?" Gu Xingyin nodded. Song Wanwan opened her mouth. She had a long list of questions. However, Gu Xingyin beat her to it and said, "If you want to ask me how he confessed, how I agreed to it, and what we did together, please keep your mouth shut." Song Wanwan. How ruthless. These were the questions she wanted to ask the most. In the end, Gu Xingyin gave a brief account of what happened under Song Wanwan's pestering. Knowing that Guan Hanting had resigned because of Gu Xingyin, Song Wanwan's eyes were practically sparkling. She rested her chin on her hands and said with a fascinated expression, A man like Mr. Guan is the perfect Prince Charming in my heart. She then realized the relationship between her best friend and her Prince Charming. She quickly added, "Don't worry, Ming Ming. I only admire my Prince Charming. I don't covet him at all." Gu Xingyin smiled and rolled her eyes at her. She did not say a word. Just like that, the days passed quietly. 2 months later, just as Gu Xingyin was about to welcome the long break of the semester, she received news that Zhao Li had a miscarriage. It was said that she had accidentally been frightened by a stray dog that had somehow snuck in while she was out for a walk. She was already at an advanced age, and her pregnancy was not stable. With the scare, she saw red that night. In the end, it was not saved. Zhao Li was disappointed, but Deng Yuanlin was even more disappointed than her. He had high hopes for this child too. Deng Yuanlin blamed Zhao Li for the miscarriage of the child. He was no longer willing to see her, and spent every night in the gentle village outside. 2 years later, Gu Xingyin heard the news of the Deng Group's master and his wife's divorce. Probably because she lost her child and was hated by her husband, Deng Yuanlin could no longer tolerate Zhao Li's increasingly violent temper. Even at this time, Deng Huijun was still in the United States. This showed how ruthless this father was, a heartless father. Just as Zhao Li had expected, the property she got from the divorce was far from what she should have. She filed to court. However, since a man like Deng Yuanlin dared to ask for a divorce, he was naturally prepared. In the end, Zhao Li could only leave the Deng family with a small amount of compensation. It wasn't until more than a month later that Deng Huijun, who was far away in the U.S., received news of her parents' divorce. As for her, she was awarded to her mother. Was her she with his ability, if he wanted a daughter, he would never let her be given to his wife. He just did not want to raise such a burden. Gu Xingyin turned off the news on her phone, and no longer looked at it. Ming Ming. Someone called her not far away. Gu Xingyin responded and walked toward the person. She took his hand in hers. Guan Hanting. The other person's voice was a little confused. Ming Ming rarely called him so seriously. I love you. This world is over. See you later. Chapter 1823. The universe was filled with chaos and darkness. There was no heaven and earth. The entire world was gray and confused. God said, "Let there be light." And so, there was light in the world. Over the next few days, God used his boundless power to create air, gather water, create the sun, moon, stars, birds, and beasts. The world began to be filled with vitality. Then, God used his hands to create the most beautiful creatures in the world, the emissaries representing God. Angels. Gu Xingyin felt as if he had fallen into a state of chaos. She couldn't open her eyes. Her ears couldn't hear. Her consciousness couldn't perceive anything, until a ray of powerful radiance broke through the ancient darkness and illuminated her world. Her chaotic divine sense finally seemed to be able to breathe, and became clear. Thou art my creation, the 8th seraph. God looked at the figure in front of him and suddenly hesitated. He couldn't see through her future, he couldn't even guess what she would be in charge of. This was the first time the omnipotent God felt at a loss. In front of her, there were 7 companions who were born before her and were born with knowledge. The seraphs were also very curious as they looked at their companion who was still in the form of a baby. The newly born angels all understood everything. They looked at each other and for the first time, directly saw the difference between their companion and themselves. She didn't have wings. As the seraph leader, the deputy king of heaven, Lucifer directly asked his doubts. God, what is her name? Why doesn't she have wings? Lucifer was the God's most satisfied creation, and also his favorite angel. God was silent for a moment when he heard this question, because the existence of this seraph was beyond the expectations of the laws. As the God of creation, every angel born from his hands would be clearly written in the book of creation. Their name, their duties, and even their future. 7 was a fixed number. But now, in the high crystal sky, there appeared the 8th seraph that even God didn't expect. God's lips finally moved and said, Carry, the silver-haired seraph. The noble angel, the incarnation of God. The book of creation emitted a huge golden light as it faithfully recorded these words. Gu Xingyin could feel an immense power coming from the void and entering her body. At the same time, the body of the silver-haired baby girl floating in the air began to change rapidly and elongate. Almost instantly, she turned into a beautiful woman with silver hair, silver eyes, and a gentle face. Her body was naked. Newborn angels didn't have any sense of shame. Fortunately, her long silver hair covered her body, so people couldn't see her important parts. However, at this moment, the gods felt that this scene was inexplicably dazzling. His cold voice rang out in the minds of all the angels. You are my emissaries. You should set an example for all living beings. You must not be naked. As soon as he finished speaking, a golden light flashed on all the angels, and a layer of soft white robes appeared on them. Gu Xingyin lowered her head to look at herself. She looked at the god in front of her, who was shrouded in blinding holy light. Suddenly, she smiled and threw herself at him. Even the divinity himself couldn't react in time, because no angel would dare to do such a rude thing to him. Chapter 1824. Furthermore, the holy light around the god wasn't just for show. It would hurt her. The god instinctively wanted to dodge, but he underestimated Carrie's speed. The silver-haired blazing angel crashed straight into the god's embrace. The god instinctively reached out his hand to cover her. He was stunned. Why was Carrie able to ignore the holy light? The other blazing angels were also shocked. They didn't know what the holy light on the god's body was used for. But as the god's creations, they believed in the god from the bottom of their souls, and were naturally respectful of the god. So they definitely wouldn't dare to act so disrespectfully. As the blazing angel leader chosen by the god, Lucifer was the first to kneel down. Please forgive Carrie, God behind her. The other 6 blazing angels also knelt down. They naturally thought that the god would be displeased because of this. But in reality he wasn't. The god was more shocked than angry right now. Or perhaps it should be said that he wasn't angry because of Carrie's actions. Gu Xingyin almost couldn't control her actions. The moment she opened her eyes, the instinct of wanting to get close to her creator made her body react faster than her mind. Crashing into the holy light, it was also the first time Gu Xingyin saw the god's face that no living creature had ever seen before. Perfect. Apart from these 2 words, there was no other adjective that could describe the face of a deity. As a body formed by the laws, the god's true body, every inch of it was flawless. It was even more impactful than Lucifer, who was said to be perfect and the most beautiful among the blazing angels. Gu Xingyin smiled happily. God, I actually have the same hair color as you. This was also why the god was shocked at the time. He knew very well that as creations, even the most powerful blazing angel didn't have the right to have something similar to the gods. But the Carrie in front of him didn't just have the same hair color as him. Even her face was 70% similar to his. This was also why he set Carrie's status as the incarnation of the god in the book of creation. The god used his divine power to push away the angel in his arms and said in an emotionless voice, Carrie, have you forgotten the etiquette of angels? Gu Xingyin's consciousness seemed to have finally returned to her body when the gods pushed her away. She took a step back and, like the other seraphs, knelt before the figure in front of her. My God, please punish Carrie for her rudeness. He lowered his head submissively, and was incomparably respectful. This was the angelic form that the gods had hoped to see the most. However, when he saw Carrie kneeling before him, he felt an inexplicable sense of irritation. Even though they had lived in the darkness of chaos for trillions of years, the gods had never felt anything like this. He couldn't help but ask the Book of Creation, "You really don't know Carrie's background?" The Book of Creation was very honest. There are no records of Carrie in the Book of Creation. This everything not only included the past, but also the future. All living beings could be traced back to their past in the Book of Creation. As long as God was willing to use his divine power, he could also perceive the future. As the God of creation, everything in this world was under his control. But now there was a variable. This variable was Jiao Lian. Actually, I regretted writing the first chapter as soon as I started. I wrote 2 chapters in 2 hours. Starting from the first word, I was stuck like a dog. If I can't finish 4 chapters, I'll add them tomorrow. Scary. Chapter 1825. In the end, God didn't punish Carrie. He divided all the angels according to their duties. Until it was Carrie's turn. God felt a bit of a headache. He didn't know what to do with Carrie. Ever since the other angels were born, the laws had already stated their duties, but Carrie didn't. He thought for a bit, then finally spoke. Carrie, stay by my side for now. As soon as he said that, the angels were shocked again. Staying by God's side meant that they would have to stay in the crystal heaven where God resided. The crystal heaven was one of the places with the densest Holy Spirit power in heaven, as well as the place where the pressure of heaven was the strongest. The blazing angels were barely able to stay here, but if a cherub below the blazing angel level were to appear in the future, they wouldn't even be able to stay here. With their strength, they wouldn't be able to withstand the might of the crystal heaven. Angels were divided into 3 levels: upper angels, middle angels, and lower angels. Among them, the upper angels were blazing angels, cherubs, and thrones. Middle angels were Lord angels, virtue angels, and ability angels. Lower angels were authority angels, archangels, and normal angels. The 8 blazing angels, including Carrie, were the most honorable highnesses in the entire heaven other than the gods. Even if the blazing angels weren't affected by the crystal heaven's might for a short period of time, from what God said, Carrie wouldn't be staying in the crystal heaven for a short period of time. If that was the case, Gabriel, who also had a female appearance, looked at Carrie with a bit of worry. Gu Xingyin didn't understand the worry of her compatriots at all. In fact, when she heard this news, she felt like a flower had bloomed in her heart. She had a natural sense of admiration for the gods. To be able to get closer to God was the happiest thing in the world for Carrie. As for the crystal heaven's holy light that made all blazing angels feel threatened, Carrie didn't notice anything wrong with it. The gods also realized that this 8th seraph, who was out of their expectations, was completely different from the other seraphs. Rather than calling her a blazing angel, it was more like himself. God could only suppress this thought in his mind. In this world, there was only one God of creation. Those were the words of the laws. No matter what Carrie's identity was, she could only be a blazing angel. And so, the matter was settled. The other 7 blazing angels left the sacred hall. They had their own residences, and were now going to start building their own palaces, and dealing with their own matters. Only the deities and Gu Xingyin, who had nothing to do, were left in the sacred hall. The gods did not speak, so Gu Xingyin lowered her head and silently thought about her own matters. She didn't know why she had come to this world. After the mission in the previous world ended, she returned to the pure white space. After confirming that she still couldn't break through the spatial rift with her current strength, she chose to carry out the mission again. While transferring the world, she heard the system's voice. Data error, transmission error. After that, she came to this place. The system was nowhere to be found. Therefore, Gu Xingyin was completely dumbfounded by the current situation. She didn't know what kind of mission she would face in this world. Moreover, according to the status of this body, who could pose a threat to him? Could it be Gabriel? Chapter 1826. Carrie. The god sitting on the divine throne suddenly spoke. Gu Xingyin raised her head when she heard that. Her gaze uncontrollably fell on the indescribable holy light. She was the only one in this world who had seen the god's face through the holy light. As if she was bewitched, Gu Xingyin walked towards the divine throne step by step. This behavior was close to being rude again. However, the god on the divine throne did not react at all. Gu Xingyin walked step by step to the front of the divine throne, then knelt down close to the god. She had an uncontrollable admiration and yearning for the god who created her. Gu Xingyin gently leaned her head on the god's knee. From her angle, she could only see the bright golden light. "My God!" she shouted in a low voice. She didn't have any accessories on her head. Her long, silvery hair flowed down her shoulders and landed loosely on the white jade floor. At this time, Carrie did not have the slightest majesty and nobility of a seraph. She was completely like a child who was acting coquettishly in front of the person she liked to be close to the most. In terms of age, Carrie, who was just born today, was indeed a child. The god's eyes trembled. Finally, he gently raised his hand and stroked the top of Gu Xingyin's head. He softly reprimanded. As a seraph, how can you show such a weak appearance? Gu Xingyin could hear that there was not much blame in the god's voice. She couldn't help but raise her head and rub the god's hand that had not left yet. Her pure silver eyes were full of smiles. Carrie will only act coquettishly in front of the god. Before Carrie was born, all the seraphs, including the god, were certain without a doubt that Lucifer, as a seraph leader, would be the most beautiful angel in the entire heaven. Because he was the brilliant morning star, the master of the stars. He was the seraph that the god created with the greatest patience and energy, the closest to himself. He even had the title Phil, that the god personally gave him. The other blazing angels that were born later also proved this point. Be it in terms of appearance or power, no blazing angel could compare to Lucifer. That was until Carrie appeared. Looking at the silver-haired, silver-eyed fellow who was completely different from them, and had no wings. All of the blazing angels fell into confusion and silence. Her appearance was comparable to Lucifer's unparalleled beauty. Her strength was something that no blazing angel could see through. She did not have the 6 wings that symbolized the noble status of a blazing angel. Carrie was an extremely mysterious existence in the hearts of all angels. However, the gods had personally admitted that she was a blazing angel. The seraphs did not doubt the words of their god at all. They completely acknowledged that Carrie was one of them. Actually, even the gods themselves were not clear about this. In this world, Carrie was the first existence that he couldn't control. After all, it was his creation. Looking at the blazing angel lying on his knees, a rare trace of pity flashed through God's heart that had never wavered before. Carrie, the great cathedral that I live in is not suitable for a blazing angel to live in. Build your own palace outside the great cathedral. Yes, my God. Gu Xingyin lowered her head and listened to the order. Seeing Carrie's figure disappear from the great cathedral, the god supported his forehead with one hand and began to think about how to arrange Carrie in the future. God, how's the god queen? Today's 6th update. I won't update today. I'll go look up some information tonight and organize my thoughts. This kind of theme is too challenging. Tomorrow's update will make up for today's 2 chapters. Good night everyone. While I'm at it, I'll ask for another ticket. Chapter 1827. In heaven where God existed, all the rules were set up very easily. In the angel reincarnation pool, new angels were constantly born. Among them, there were 2-winged and 4-winged ones, but the highest was only a cherub, and there were very few of them. In the entire heaven, only the 8 majesties created by God himself had the rank of seraph. 100,000 years later, when heaven's first creation celebration was held, Gu Xingyin finally welcomed her first job. The Dean of Angel Academy. Angel Academy was a place for the newly born little angels to learn knowledge and magic. Other angels were not born with perfect bodies like seraphs. Like ordinary creatures, they would go through the transformation from infancy to adulthood. As the power in their bodies grew stronger, they would finally transform into a perfect body, which was also the peak state of an angel. After the creation celebration, the gods disappeared without a trace. Carrie. Gu Xingyin stood on the steps, wondering if she should go to Angel Academy to take a look. Then she heard her name being called. In the entire heaven, there were only 2 people who could call her by her name, God and Seraph. Gu Xingyin turned around and performed a perfect etiquette in the direction of the voice. Your Highness Lucifer. The angel standing in front of her had a beautiful face that surpassed all of heaven. His pale blue eyes seemed to reflect the entire sky, and his long golden hair was one of the most dazzling colors in the world. He wore a gorgeous robe that symbolized his status as a seraph, and the 6 wings of holy light quietly fell behind him. Gu Xingyin looked at Lucifer and sighed in her heart. This noble seraph was definitely a natural winner in life. Lucifer's gentle eyes revealed a trace of helplessness. Carrie, I said before, there's no need to call me Your Highness. Carrie said seriously, Your Highness, there's a difference in status. Since she was personally designated as a seraph by God, then as a seraph, Lucifer was naturally her superior. Lucifer stared at his companion in front of him. He could sense that his companion was different. Seraph Lucifer was one of the most beautiful angels in heaven, and also one of the most powerful angels in heaven. This was one of them. The other was Carrie. Lucifer was already powerful enough to comprehend a portion of the laws. He could vaguely sense that this shouldn't be the case. Under normal circumstances, he should be the one and only brilliant morning star, the most powerful deputy of heavenly kingdom. However, angels were the embodiment of the 7 virtues, and they had the purest faith in the gods. At most, Lucifer was puzzled in his heart. He wasn't jealous or suspicious of Carrie's identity. The gods said that she was a seraph, their companion, so Carrie was. So he smiled gently. You will be the dean of the Angel Academy. Carrie, you haven't been to the Angel Academy yet, right? Let me show you. Gu Xingyin smiled and thanked him. Thank you, Your Highness Lucifer. Not far away, the other seraphs and angels were looking at the 2 seraphs on the steps closest to the throne. Gabriel, who was the only female among the seraphs, sighed and said, Every time I see His Highness Lucifer and His Highness Carrie standing together, it's a pleasure. Chapter 1828. The other seraphs nodded in agreement. There were also differences in status among the seraphs. Those with lower status would call those with higher status Your Highness. Lucifer was a seraph leader and was the number 1 seraph by default. All seraphs respectfully called him Your Highness. Although Carrie didn't have a clear position, from her strength and the gods' extraordinary love for her, she was undoubtedly second only to Lucifer among the seraphs. Seraphs were pure and kind by nature, and never hid their pursuit of beauty. As Lucifer's adjutant, Michael blinked his red eyes and suddenly said to Medellin, who was standing beside him, Your Highness Medellin, your drawing skills are so good. Can you draw this beautiful scene? Other than Lucifer and Carrie, only Medellin, the Prime Minister of Heaven, could be called Your Highness by the other seraphs. Medellin was the most gentle of the seraphs. When he smiled, ripples seemed to spread in his blue eyes. Michael, if you can get His Highness Lucifer and Her Highness Carrie's consent, I'll make a painting for you. How about it? He was also looking forward to a painting that included the 2 highnesses. Michael's personality was the most unpredictable. As the adjutant of a seraph leader, he was often caught by Lucifer at work. He thought about it and gave up in frustration. Forget it, I'm afraid His Highness will ask me about work again. He looked longingly at the people who were talking to each other, and secretly took out the magic crystal ball. Samuel's eyes widened. Michael, you're crazy. He was the angel of death in charge of life and fate and the warden of the seraph prison. In terms of personality, Samuel was the most serious of all the seraphs. Michael smiled and said, God and the 2 highnesses never said that I can't record them with a crystal ball. Samuel, don't worry, don't worry. Gabriel secretly smiled. She clearly saw that the moment Michael took out the crystal ball, His Highness Lucifer's gaze had turned towards her. His Highness didn't say anything, but Gabriel could already imagine the scene of Michael's crystal ball being confiscated. Gu Xingyin naturally noticed this as well. She smiled and said, It's been 100,000 years, but Michael's personality hasn't changed at all. Blazing angels represented the face of heaven, so they were naturally very strict in terms of etiquette and other aspects. From the moment he was born, Michael was the most lively of all the blazing angels. She didn't expect that after so many years, he would only be able to act a little more gracefully in front of outsiders. Once there were only a few close companions left, he immediately returned to his original form. Lucifer's smile remained unchanged. Perhaps I was too lenient with him. When we go back, we'll teach him a lesson. Gu Xingyin. Michael, good luck. All the angels in heaven knew that although His Highness Lucifer looked gentle, he was the one who paid the most attention to rules and etiquette. Michael fell into his hands, and it could be said that he was miserable. Gu Xingyin couldn't help but say, Your Highness, Michael doesn't have any ill intentions. Lucifer looked at her with a smile. I won't punish him. Don't worry, Gabriel. I'm just teaching him the etiquette that needs to be practiced. Gu Xingyin couldn't help but sympathize with Michael, who didn't know that Battle Angel Michael only liked to go to the battlefield and had no interest in the etiquette and history of heaven at all. Chapter 1829. The two walked towards Angel Academy. The creation celebration was held in Jupiter, second only to the seventh crystal heaven. Because most of the Angel Academy were little angels who had just been born from the angel reincarnation pool. Their bodies couldn't withstand too much pressure, so it was located in the lunar heaven, the furthest from the crystal heaven. The two directly entered the lunar heaven through the teleportation array in the crystal heaven. The lunar heaven was generally a place where the lower three levels of angels lived. These angels were rarely seen even in the past, let alone the noble Seraph Highness. Along the way, Gu Xingyin kept hearing all kinds of exclamations, and angels kept bowing to the two of them. The fanaticism in the eyes of the angels made her a little speechless. Lucifer smiled and turned his head. Not used to it. Without waiting for Gu Xingyin's reply, he continued. You've lived in the crystal sky for a long time and rarely appeared in front of other angels in the past 100,000 years, especially the angels of the Luna. They've almost never seen you. He thought for a moment and said, when you become the Dean of Angel Academy, you will come here every day. You will soon get used to it. Gu Xingyin looked at him, and was completely used to it. Some of the bolder angels would come up with red faces, and give Lucifer a bouquet of flowers. Such angels were not rare. Gu Xingyin looked at their excited expressions and realized for the first time what kind of status Lucifer, as a seraph leader, had among the ordinary angels. No wonder when she chatted with the other seraphs, everyone said that Lucifer was the most popular and respected angel in the entire heaven. Lucifer turned his head and saw Gu Xingyin's amazed expression. He couldn't help but laugh. Don't be too surprised, Carrie. His smile was brighter than the sky. When you officially become the Dean of Angel Academy, and those angels get familiar with you, you will also be treated with such enthusiasm. In the hearts of all the angels, there was a label for the noble Seraph Highness. The most powerful and beautiful seraph leader Lucifer. The most gentle and kind Prime Minister of Heaven, His Highness Medellin. The most serious and cold angel of death, His Highness Samuel. The most fiery and passionate battle angel, His Highness Michael. The kindest and most generous Archangel Gabriel. The most lazy and adorable Archangel, His Highness Beryl. The most knowledgeable and reliable guardian angel, His Highness Raphael. There was also the most mysterious person, Her Highness Jiao Lian. Yes, the most mysterious. Unlike the other blazing angel highnesses, they all had their own positions. Many angels had seen them before, and had some contact with them. But Gu Xingyin was different. She had been born for 100,000 years. Most of her time was spent in the crystal sky, in the great cathedral, accompanying God. Many people had never seen what Princess Carrie looked like, or what her personality was like. There were even many angels who silently wondered who was more important in God's heart between His Highness Lucifer and Her Highness Carrie. Under the gazes of all the angels, they arrived at the Angel Academy. Not long after entering the gate, Gu Xingyin saw a small fireball flying towards her. The small fireball was flying in a crooked manner. Obviously, its caster was not able to fully control it. An attack of this level was naturally nothing to Gu Xingyin. She didn't even care as she continued to walk forward. The fireball automatically extinguished when it was a few meters away from her. Chapter 1830. Gu Xingyin and Lucifer didn't have much of a reaction. On the other side, the teacher who was teaching the little angels basic magic was scared out of his wits. He quickly walked in front of the two blazing angels. Greetings, Your Highness Lucifer. Greetings. He looked at Gu Xingyin's face and froze for a moment. He suddenly realized that he didn't know this person whose appearance was comparable to His Highness Lucifer's. Lucifer opened his mouth and said, "This is Carrie, the new Dean of the Angel Academy." The angel hurriedly bowed to Gu Xingyin. Although ordinary angels like them didn't have the chance to see Carrie, the name of Blazing Angel Carrie was firmly engraved in their hearts. Gu Xingyin, on the other hand, looked at the little angel beside the angel. This little guy was clearly still very young. His 4 small wings hung softly behind his back. Soft golden curly hair piled on top of his head. His clear blue eyes were staring at her without blinking. Really cute, she thought to herself, and a natural smile appeared on her face. "Little guy, what's your name?" When the little angel heard Gu Xingyin talking to him, His face immediately showed a happy expression. The white wings on his back spread open, and his whole body flew up in a crooked manner. However, their shaky appearance made the teacher very worried. This batch of newborn angels hadn't even started flying lessons yet. But when the teacher saw that the two noble highnesses were looking at the little angel, he relaxed. With the two highnesses here, they wouldn't let anything happen to the little angel, right? The angel teacher's worry didn't appear. The little angel flew in a crooked manner. Although it wasn't very beautiful, he still flew to a height that was parallel to Gu Xingyin's line of sight. Then he tentatively reached out his hand toward Gu Xingyin. He didn't know if this beautiful highness was willing to let him touch her. Gu Xingyin's response was to open her arms. The little angel's nervous expression instantly disappeared. Then he fell from the sky. Because he was too happy, he forgot how to fly. But he didn't fall on the grass. Instead, he fell into a soft embrace. Little guy, you have to be careful next time. The little angel raised her head and looked into the pair of silver eyes. He was stunned. What a beautiful highness. The angel teacher saw this scene, and was both surprised and envious. He was envious that the little angel could actually be so close to her highness blazing angel. Lucifer was also clearly very surprised. He didn't think that Carrie would like the little angel so much. Seraphs were different from other angels, so even someone as gentle as Medellin had never hugged a little angel in public. He subconsciously wanted to stop her. He felt that this would affect Carrie's prestige in the eyes of the angels. But when he looked up and saw Gu Xingyin's smile, Lucifer swallowed his words. Carrie seemed to be really happy. In the end, Lucifer just smiled and said, "Since Carrie likes little angels so much, it seems like the position of Dean of the Angel Academy suits you very well." Gu Xingyin narrowed his eyes and did not hide his fondness for the little angels. They are really cute. In the crystal sky high up in the sky, God subconsciously called Carrie, but didn't get a response. Only then did he realize that she didn't come back with him. For some reason, God felt a little uncomfortable. In the past 100,000 years, he was used to having Carrie by his side. 4 Watch. 6 Watch at night. See you later. Chapter 1831. The god's golden eyes pierced through the endless void and landed on the moon in the distance. He looked at Carrie, who was holding a newborn angel in her arms, and his face was filled with pure joy. She seemed to like the angel. The god suddenly thought of 100,000 years ago, when Carrie had just been born. A tiny baby girl was born in his hands. The silver-haired, silver-eyed angel had shown a beauty that could suppress all creatures from her infancy. The god thought with an expressionless face that Carrie and Lucian were the most beautiful angels he had ever seen. Of course, they were also the most beautiful angels when they grew up. Gu Xingyin suddenly stopped in the middle of putting down the angel. She raised her head in confusion and glanced at the sky. Lucifer noticed her movement and asked, "What's wrong?" Gu Xingyin looked away and put down the baby who refused to leave her arms. She shook her head. "Nothing." Lucifer glanced in the direction she had just looked. Indeed, he didn't find anything, so he didn't care. They didn't know that this scene was clearly seen by the high and mighty God. "She's actually so sharp." The god's low voice echoed in the great cathedral. "God, Her Highness Carrie's power is rising very quickly." The Book of Creation on his lap said. The Book of Creation was the god's companion artifact. It was also the one that had accompanied the god for the longest time. Because Gu Xingyin had stayed in the crystal sky for 100,000 years, the Book of Creation was very familiar with this special Her Highness blazing angel. The other party's strength was rising too quickly. In terms of combat power, the current Carrie should be about the same as Lucifer. It sounded like it was very normal. But in fact, being able to be on par with Lucifer was an abnormal thing in itself. What kind of existence was Lucifer? Back then, the god had used up a quarter of his divine power to create everything in the world. Creating a single Lucifer had consumed 2/4 of his divine power. It could be said that Lucifer was a near-perfect creation that the god had used himself as a template. He had spent countless divine power and energy to create. It could even be said that Lucifer had completely surpassed the level of creation. In terms of strength alone, he was close to a demigod. In fact, in the heavens, the the gods were just a form of faith. The one who truly ruled over heaven was Lucifer, the deputy ruler of heaven. After Lucifer was born, God used the last quarter of his divine power to create the other 6 seraphs. From this, it could be seen how huge the gap between the other seraphim and the seraphim was. Carrie's birth was a complete accident. Instead of saying that Carrie was a creation created by God, it would be better to say that she was a gift from the spirit of chaos to heaven. Before God created this world, the whole world was in chaos and darkness. It was God who couldn't bear the loneliness of time, so he broke the darkness of chaos and created everything in the world. After the heaven and earth were formed, the darkness of chaos began to disappear. Carrie was the last gift to God before the birth of the 7 seraphs, the establishment of the law of order in the world, and the disappearance of the chaos and darkness. Therefore, she was different from Seraph from the very beginning. She was not born from the hands of God. Chapter 1832. At that time, the gods had allowed her to live in the crystal sky for a long time, because they wanted to observe her better. But after 100,000 years, the gods had confirmed it. Carrie was no different from the other seraphs. She had the same pure mind, loved the light, and had a firm faith in the gods. The gods were finally relieved, and began to hand over the matters of heaven to Carrie. On this side, Gu Xingyin followed Lucifer all the way to the office area of Angel Academy. The angel in charge had already received the news, and was excitedly waiting for the arrival of the new dean. These angels did not have the slightest bit of jealousy at being robbed of their power. On the contrary, they were very excited that a Seraph Highness had come to be their dean. What a great honor it was to be able to work under Her Highness Carrie. Lucifer took Gu Xingyin to familiarize herself with the environment of Angel Academy before leaving. Gu Xingyin was very grateful for this. As a Seraph leader, Lucifer had to deal with many things every day. Under such circumstances, he took the time to accompany her. He was simply a good colleague in heaven. There was no night in heaven. The angels' work and rest time were strictly calculated according to the hourglass. Gu Xingyin stayed at Angel Academy for an entire day. After that, she discovered that there were actually several vice deans in Angel Academy. In addition, there were several assistant deans. It was also because of these people that Angel Academy had been able to operate normally for so many years without a dean. This also meant that Gu Xingyin's position as the dean of Angel Academy was completely in name. If nothing unexpected happened, her daily work would probably be to report to the academy, and then spend the whole day reading books, and enjoying the scenery in the Angel Library next to the academy. At most, there might be some big decisions or bills that she, as the dean, might need to look over and sign. Gu Xingyin breathed a long sigh of relief. She liked this job. A day passed. Gu Xingyin walked towards the teleportation array of the Luna sky, preparing to go directly from here to the crystal sky. Most of the angels in the moon sky were ordinary angels, so this place was completely different from the crystal sky where Gu Xingyin was, and even the Jupiter sky where the seraphim lived. According to Gu Xingyin's description, this place was more like the human world in Gu Xingyin's previous mission. As far as the eye could see, there were rows upon rows of shops opened by the angels. The atmosphere was completely incompatible with the solemn heaven. Gu Xingyin saw a flower shop not far away. She thought of the passionate and shy angels when she first arrived on the moon today. What kind of flowers are these? Gu Xingyin asked as she pointed at a bunch of exceptionally beautiful flowers. The color of this flower was a gorgeous red. It was very big, with hundreds of layers of petals competing to bloom. Each petal was shining with a little bit of starlight. It was incomparably magnificent. Gu Xingyin was a little surprised. Because the gods liked holy and pure things, it was rare to see such a gorgeous and eye-catching flower in heaven. The owner of the flower shop was a two-winged angel. When he saw Gu Xingyin, his face turned red with excitement. "Your Highness, this is the holy flower of the elves from the mortal world, the elven flower." Elven flower? No wonder. Gu Xingyin instantly reacted. She had read in the classics that the holy flower of the elves was one of the most beautiful flowers in the world. It was also a treasure of the elves, and was strictly forbidden from being picked by outsiders. Then there was a problem. Gu Xingyin stared at the shop owner. The holy flower of the elves is not allowed to be picked by outsiders. Where did you get this? Chapter 1833. High-level angels naturally had a strong level suppression for low-level angels. At this moment, Gu Xingyin just put away the smile on her face. She didn't do anything, but it was enough to make the angel pale. Facing Gu Xingyin's questioning, the angel didn't dare to hide anything. This flower shop is Her Highness Gabriel's property. I'm just an employee. So it was Gabriel. Gabriel had a generous and forthright personality, and he had friends almost everywhere. It was said that the Light Elf King of the Elves had a good personal relationship with her. If it was Gabriel, it was reasonable that she could get the elven flower. Her expression softened. Don't be afraid. I don't mean to punish you. She pointed at the delicately packaged elven flower and asked, "How many crystal coins does this cost?" The angel quickly shook her head. "If you like it, Princess Gabriel, you can take it." Gu Xingyin frowned slightly. "What's the reason? I don't want to take advantage of this." The angel smiled and said, "You don't know. Her Highness Gabriel said a long time ago that in the places under her jurisdiction, as long as His Highness Lucifer and Princess Gabriel come to shop, it will be free. I don't dare to disobey her orders." Gu Xingyin raised her eyebrows. "What's the reason?" The angel quickly shook her head and said that she didn't know. Seeing this, Gu Xingyin didn't ask anymore. She picked up the elven flower and left. He would thank Gabriel when the time came. The angel heaved a sigh of relief when he saw her figure disappear into the teleportation array. At that time, Her Highness Gabriel had said, "It's already a great honor for beauties like His Highness Lucifer and Her Highness Gabrielle to buy my things." However, the angel didn't dare to say this in front of Gu Xingyin. Therefore, the noble, beautiful, and generous Archangel Gabriel in heaven was actually a complete beauty lover. The moment Gu Xingyin returned to the crystal sky, God sensed it. Deity looked at Carrie out of habit. At first glance, he saw the bouquet in Gu Xingyin's hand. Because the attribute of the gods was light, the gods' favorite colors were white and gold, which were the purest colors of light in the world. He didn't like the extremely bright red color of the fairy flower. He even felt a little disgusted. But Deity didn't care about the color of the bouquet. He recognized the flower. With the Book of Creation, which could be considered a cheat, God only needed to take a look at anything and the Book of Creation would be able to display all the attributes of the item. Of course, there was one exception, and that was Carrie. The god's gaze fell on the last row of words. The holy flower of the elves is also a flower of love. An adult elf will pluck this flower and give it to the person he or she likes. If the other party accepts it, it means that the other party has accepted his or her feelings. A flame of anger rose in Deity's heart. Who gave this to Carrie? There was no room for selfish desires in heaven. Who was it that dared to disobey his orders so blatantly? As the center of the crystal sky, the god was in a bad mood. The Holy Spirit power of the entire crystal sky started to stir. Gu Xingyin, who had accompanied the god for 100,000 years, immediately noticed this. Who made the god unhappy? 7th update. 3rd update. See you later. Moi see the baby here. After reading the article, remember to vote for Gao Lingji. Chapter 1834. She quickly walked into the great cathedral and looked at the figure on the god's throne. God. She knelt down and asked in a low voice, "Why are you angry?" "Why am I angry?" God asked himself the same question. Was it because he saw the flower in Carrie's hand? Was it because someone violated the precepts of heaven? But how many of the tens of millions of angels in heaven had violated the precepts of the 7 virtues? A lot. Had he ever been angry when those angels violated the precepts? Never. Then was it just because this angel was Carrie? God lowered his eyes and looked directly at the seraph kneeling on the ground with his light golden eyes. She was still holding the bouquet of bright elven flowers in her hand. She looked at him with the same trust and attachment as before. She was still his Carrie. She hadn't changed at all. The restless spiritual power in the great cathedral suddenly calmed down. At the same time, Gu Xingyin felt a gentle force lift her up. She stood up obediently and walked toward the figure on the God's throne. God didn't do anything, which meant that he acquiesced to her approach. Gu Xingyin walked until she was in front of the God's throne. She raised her head and looked at the figure shrouded in holy light in front of her. This holy light was very threatening to all creatures, but it didn't have any effect on Gu Xingyin. God, why are you angry? She asked the question again in a low voice. God looked at the seraph who was close to him. Her beautiful eyebrows frowned slightly. Her clear silver eyes were filled with obvious worry. She was worried. In this world, there were angels who were worried about God. All angels felt that God was omnipotent. He was the most powerful and couldn't have any emotions. But this seraph was worried about him. God felt that this feeling was very strange. He didn't answer Gu Xingyin's question. Instead he asked, Carrie, are you worried about me? This wasn't something difficult to admit. Gu Xingyin nodded. God's mood was brightened by her frank attitude. But he still said, I don't need it, Carrie. Gu Xingyin's beautiful eyes curved into a smile. I know that God is omnipotent. But God, please allow your faithful followers to keep you in their hearts at all times. The God didn't say anything. He had to admit that Carrie's words made him feel better. Until he saw the bouquet of flowers in her hands. The deity asked, Carrie, where did you get the fairy flower in your hand? So God knew him? Gu Xingyin felt a little strange. She thought that the gods would not care about such trivial things. She answered honestly, I was passing by the moon and happened to see this bouquet of elven flowers. She lowered her voice a little. Carrie thinks that this bouquet of flowers is very beautiful. She paused for a second. Then, as if she had mustered up some kind of courage, she looked directly at the god under the holy light and said, I want to give it to God. Deity was shocked. Gu Xingyin's voice was somewhat strange, but it was concealed within the cold tone of his voice. Gu Xingyin didn't notice it. You said you want to give it to me? Gu Xingyin was a little shy, but she still nodded. In her mind, deities deserved the best. But she didn't expect that after she nodded, the god sitting on the throne didn't speak for a long time. Gu Xingyin asked uneasily, God, you don't like it? Chapter 1835. God looked at the seraph who had accompanied him for a long time. She looked at him with attachment and trust in her eyes, but there was no lust. God instantly understood. Jiao Lian most likely had no idea what the elven flower signified. Looking at her cautious eyes, God's heart suddenly softened. He stretched out his hand and received the bouquet of beautiful elven flowers. God actually didn't like this color. But he said, If it's beautiful, Carrie, I like it very much. He shouldn't have accepted it. God knew that what he should have done was to reject Carrie's words and tell her what the fairy flowers meant. This was the most suitable method, but Carrie would definitely be disappointed. God decided to pretend that he didn't know the use of the fairy flowers and just treated it as an ordinary gift. Gu Xingyin accompanied God for a while and left the great cathedral. Gu Xingyin put the flowers in a crystal vase not far from the god's throne. That place before this had always been filled with the holy light flower of heaven. After a long silence, the Book of Creation's voice sounded. God, your attitude towards Her Highness Kalia has already surpassed that of ordinary creations. The Book of Creation didn't say one more thing. God's attitude toward Carrie had even surpassed that of His Highness Lucifer. In response to the Book of Creation's words, God looked down and said, Carrie wasn't an ordinary creation. Hearing God's answer, the Book of Creation looked at God worriedly. As God's companion artifact, it could ignore the holy light that could block anything in the world and directly see God's expression behind the holy light. But God's face was the same for thousands of years. There was only that layer of eternal indifference. The Book of Creation couldn't detect God's thoughts. It could only sigh faintly and fall back onto God's lap as if it had become an ordinary book. God looked down and closed it. He also closed his eyes and began to rest. When they had nothing to do, the God and the divine artifact would pass the time in silence. Gu Xingyin returned to her palace. She didn't notice the conflict between God and the Book of Creation at all. The days in heaven were always so beautiful and peaceful. Sometimes, Gu Xingyin felt that there was no difference between living like this for 10,000 years and 1 year. If there had to be a difference, it was because of the position of Dean of the Angel Academy. This mysterious seraph was finally recognized by more angels. Countless little angels were born from the angelic resurrection pool and sent to Angel Academy. They grew up and became subordinates of the 7 blazing angels. Some joined the Angel Corps, and some chose to become teachers of Angel Academy. When another creation celebration arrived, Her Highness Carrie's reputation in heaven was already close to that of the brilliant morning star, His Highness Lucifer. Gu Xingyin had a feeling that something big was going to happen. Her hunch was very accurate. In the second 100,000 years after her birth, during the second creation celebration, the infernal devils couldn't hold themselves back any longer. The demons attacked heaven, and they chose to attack on the day of the creation celebration. The provocation was self-evident. God was not the only one who was enraged. All of the angels had ugly expressions on their faces. Chapter 1836. All creatures in the world knew that God loved light and hated darkness. And the demons born in the darkness were the creatures that God hated the most. Hell was a place where God's radiance would never cover. However, such actions in hell were naturally not worthy of God's intervention. As the deputy of heaven and the commander-in-chief of the Angel Corps, Lucifer issued countless orders with a cold face. Gabriel led the Archangel Corps, Burial led the Archangel Corps, and Michael led the Archangel Corps. They set off directly from the teleportation array on the moon, and fought with the demons on the spot. As the commander-in-chief, Lucifer naturally had to go to the battlefield, but he usually did not take action. Instead, he stood on the side of the Angel Corps. Michael once joked that as long as His Highness Lucifer stood in the Angel Corps, the combat power of the entire Angel Corps would increase by more than 3 levels. Although it was an exaggeration, Lucifer's influence in the entire Angel Corps could be imagined. Out of curiosity, Gu Xingyin took the initiative to follow behind Lucifer. She also wanted to see what the demons who dared to challenge heaven looked like. Then Gu Xingyin fell silent. With such trash, they actually dared to challenge heaven? Looking at the so-called Demon King, who was almost suppressed by the Angel Corps and forced to flee by Michael's sword of judgment, Gu Xingyin deeply felt that Lucifer actually sent out 3 Angel Corps. It was simply an insult to the combat power of the Angel Corps. As if sensing her thoughts, Lucifer smiled. Do you think the other party is too weak? Gu Xingyin nodded honestly. Lucifer's pale blue eyes looked at her gently. He shook his head and smiled. Carrie, you're wrong. Gu Xingyin was a little puzzled. What did he mean? Lucifer turned his head to look at the battlefield in the distance and said softly, "It's not that the demons are too weak, but that the angels are strong enough." His voice was not loud, but Gu Xingyin looked at Lucifer standing in front of her. He stood quietly with 6 glorious wings of holy light hanging behind him. For no reason, he gave off a feeling that made people want to worship him. Gu Xingyin felt a chill in his heart. No wonder so many angels worshipped Lucifer. His personal charm was too strong. It was said that the training program of the Angel Corps was created by Lucifer. The commandments of heaven were also revised by Lucifer. Angel Academy. Even the great cathedral where the gods lived was a blueprint designed by Lucifer. He was like an omnipotent existence. Lucifer had left his shadow in almost every corner of heaven. In the hearts of many angels, compared to the gods who were always shrouded in holy light at the creation ceremony, the noble seraphim His Highness Lucifer was more like their faith. Gu Xingyin thought to herself, fortunately, there is no selfishness or evil in the hearts of the angels. Lucifer also believes in God wholeheartedly, and can be called the example of the 7 virtues. Otherwise, with heaven's current situation, who knew what would happen? She didn't know that the thing she was worried about would actually come true one day in the distant future. Your Highness Carrie, be careful. Suddenly, not far away, an angel exclaimed. Gu Xingyin felt a strong wind coming from behind. That strong wind contained an aura that Gu Xingyin hated very much. The power of darkness. 10th update. Today's update is over. Gao Lingji will wake up at 6 a.m. tomorrow and take a car to the hospital for a checkup. It's nothing. My condition hasn't been very good recently. It's just a routine checkup. Don't worry. Then I'll pick up my brother. So tomorrow's update will probably be at night, and it will be rather late. Everyone doesn't have to wait for the update. Finally, I'm looking for a wave of votes. Chapter 1837. A bright holy light shone from her body and blocked the attack. When she came back to her senses, Gu Xingyin saw who the attacker was. That person was wearing a black robe, and had an arrogant smile on his handsome and evil face. He was looking at Gu Xingyin provocatively and shockingly. Gu Xingyin frowned. Baal. According to her understanding, this person should be one of the great demon kings of hell, Baal. Sin Greed. Gu Xingyin was standing at the headquarters of the Angel Corps. No one knew what method Baal used to sneak in here. The angels who came back to their senses prepared to attack this demon who had barged into the headquarters of the Angel Corps alone. However, they were stopped by Gu Xingyin. Don't do it. Let me do it, she said loudly. Baal smirked. I was curious. What kind of person is the seraph in heaven who has never shown her face? He looked at Gu Xingyin from head to toe and said teasingly, let's not talk about her strength for now. With this appearance, she is even more seductive than the top witches in hell. Clearly, Baal's ability to draw aggro was almost maxed out. He did not restrain his words. Almost all the angels who heard this were unable to restrain their anger. In the hearts of the angels, Her Highness the Seraph was the noblest existence in heaven. How could she be insulted by such a demon? Even Lucifer's expression turned cold. Gu Xingyin, on the other hand, seemed to be the calmest one. She was not angry at Baal's words at all. Hearing Baal's words that were almost malicious, Gu Xingyin only smiled faintly and said loudly, I will soon let you know that the identity of a seraph is not obtained by relying on one's face. As she spoke, she rose into the sky. Baal's eyes flashed with fighting spirit, and he also rose into the sky. Gu Xingyin did not want the aftermath of the battle to affect the Angel Corps. On the other hand, Bar didn't want to have to pay attention to the angels' sneak attacks while he was in battle. Holy light flashed in Gu Xingyin's hand, and a pure white sword of light formed from the power of living beings appeared in her hand. Seeing her like this, Baal still had the mood to talk. Why aren't you like those angels? You don't even have wings. Before he could finish his words, he retreated quickly and narrowly dodged a sword ray from his opponent. Gu Xingyin looked at him indifferently. Instead of worrying about this, why don't you think about how to survive from my hands later? How arrogant. Bar's eyes lit up. He liked this kind of arrogant personality, especially when the other party had a face that suited his taste. He teased, so confident? The beauty's name is Carrie, right? Why don't we make a bet? If I win, Carrie will fall into hell and become my demon queen. What do you think? Gu Xingyin curled her lips into a smile. Her answer was a sword light that could split the moon's sky. Lady Carrie's strength. Gabriel had unknowingly stopped fighting and turned to stand beside Lucifer. They looked up at the battle in the sky together. No, rather than a battle, it was a one-sided beating. Baal, who was known as the #1 demon king of hell, Baal self-proclaimed, was completely suppressed by Carrie. He could not fight back at all. Chapter 1838. Furthermore, the angels could clearly see that Carrie had not used her full strength at all. Lucifer smiled. I really didn't expect this. Even I want to spar with Carrie. Gabriel looked at the yearning expression on Lucifer's face and her heart tightened. She recalled His Highness Lucifer's terrifying strength, then looked at Her Highness Carrie's current display of strength. Gabriel felt that if the two of them really wanted to spar, they must not do it in her moon sky. The moon sky would not be able to withstand it. Gabriel and Lucifer chatted for a while, and then saw that Gu Xingyin in the air seemed to be a little impatient. In fact, she was. Gu Xingyin felt that she had beaten enough people up. She shook her hand and raised it again. Bar was shocked to find that the sword light opposite him was at least a few levels stronger than the previous attack in terms of speed and power. An unprecedented sense of danger came over him, and Bar quickly retreated. However, it was too late. The demons who were fighting with the angel army suddenly realized that something had fallen from the sky and smashed a deep hole in the ground. The angels and demons retreated one after another until the dust settled again. When they saw clearly what was in the deep hole, There was a sudden commotion on the demon's side. Who else could it be other than their Lord Bar? He was wearing a flashy black robe, and his handsome face was covered in dust. He also had 2 horns on his head. There was a bone-deep wound that started from Bar's left shoulder and went straight down to his right waist. Judging from the depth of the wound, if Bar had retreated a little slower, he would have been cut in half by Gu Xingyin's sword. An ordinary human or demon would have died from such a wound. However, Bar was a king-level demon after all. At this moment he could only grit his teeth and suck in cold air. In a moment of carelessness he met Gu Xingyin's cold eyes in midair, and he couldn't help but shudder. He would never forget that intense feeling of brushing shoulders with death. Of course, he was also traumatized by Gu Xingyin, who made him feel this way. As expected, the angels of heaven, were their looks equal to their strength? Bar thought as he grimaced. Gu Xingyin landed beside Lucifer under the admiring gazes of the angels. At that time, she really wanted to give Bar another stab. Letting a tiger return to the mountain was not her style. But just as she was about to make a move, a huge binding force came from the void, restricting her movements. It was during this opening that Bar managed to escape with his life. That strange power seemed to have only been there to stop her from killing Bar. After confirming that she no longer wanted to kill him, it withdrew. What did that mean? Gu Xingyin was a little confused. Logically speaking, in this world, the only ones who could have such power to imprison him could only be the gods. But just now, Gu Xingyin was sure that God didn't do anything. What kind of existence was secretly protecting the demons? For the first time, Gu Xingyin understood why the difference between heaven and hell was so big, but the king-level demons of hell had never had an accident. Lucifer looked at her expression and suddenly asked, "Did you notice it too, Carrie?" Chapter 1839. Gu Xingyin's heart skipped a beat. The next moment, Lucifer's voice sounded directly in her mind. "There's no way to kill a king-level demon. You noticed it just now, right?" Gu Xingyin's heart skipped a beat. Sure enough, she wasn't the only one who encountered such a situation. She heard Lucifer's telepathic communication with her, and knew that he probably didn't want too many angels to know. After all, there was a powerful existence secretly protecting the demon race. If such a truth was exposed, it would be a huge blow to the angels. For the angels who received light education from a young age, the most disgusting thing in this world was the power of darkness. And demons were undoubtedly the creatures with the most concentrated power of darkness and filth. They were the complete opposite of the radiant and holy angels. They were natural opponents. Gu Xingyin quickly asked, "Your Highness Lucifer, you noticed it too, right? Do you know what this situation is?" To Gu Xingyin's surprise, Lucifer just shook his head. "When I first fought with the demons, I noticed this. After that, I even asked my God personally," Lucifer said. Gu Xingyin looked at him curiously. God should know the reason. Lucifer met her gaze and just shook his head. "Carrie, you can only ask my God personally for the answer to this matter." "I can't say." Seeing Lucifer's determined expression, Gu Xingyin also knew that she probably couldn't get an answer from him. If the Archangel was unwilling to say, no one could do anything. Gu Xingyin secretly sighed, and planned to ask her God personally after this holy war ended. This holy war ended unexpectedly quickly. The result was naturally hell's defeat. While the entire heaven was celebrating, Gu Xingyin came to the great cathedral alone. "My God." She knelt down and prayed to the figure on the throne. "Carrie, why did you come here at this time?" The high and mighty God opened his indifferent eyes, and quietly looked down at his favorite archangel. Gu Xingyin closed her eyes. She passed her question to the God in the form of prayer. The God's eyes suddenly darkened. The great cathedral was silent for a moment. Then Gu Xingyin heard the God's low sigh. "The gap between light and darkness is getting bigger and bigger. Heaven is getting stronger and stronger while hell is getting weaker and weaker. There are already fewer king-level demons than archangels. We can't lose any more." Gu Xingyin was surprised. She couldn't help but ask, "So God, at that time, it was you who stopped me?" The God shook his head. "It wasn't me, it was the remnant will of chaos." He didn't seem to mind complaining about his helplessness in front of his beloved blazing angel. There has always been a remnant will in the darkness of chaos. After this world was created, it was integrated into the world's laws. It's chaos and treats light and darkness equally. It has always been very dissatisfied with my preference for light. The god didn't feel uncomfortable at all when talking about this. Gu Xingyin voiced her guess. So, the entire world's will is protecting the darkness? The god nodded. You can understand it that way. It's midnight first. Chapter 1840. Gu Xingyin had never thought that he would hear such words from the mouth of a god. The creator of this world was the god of light. Of course, he preferred light and hated darkness. And those who believed in God, whether angels, humans, or elves, they were all races that loved light. Hell, which gathered the power of darkness, had no way to compete with heaven. The darkness of this world, compared to the light, was too weak. She used to believe in God wholeheartedly, and never had any other thoughts, so she never considered this problem. This was the first time Gu Xingyin faced the problem of light and darkness. But God obviously didn't want to talk to her about this. Carrie, if there's nothing else you can leave. Gu Xingyin couldn't help but look up. She wanted to see God's expression at this moment, but the thick holy light blocked her sight. She could only get up and leave, returning to her own palace. A long time after Gu Xingyin left, the Book of Creation, which had been lying quietly on God's knee, suddenly floated up. God. The Book of Creation's voice sounded. The imbalance between light and darkness is getting worse. You should think of a solution. God closed his eyes. This obvious avoidance made the Book of Creation a bit anxious. It's true that you hate darkness, but God, you know very well that if this continues, there will be big problems, God said calmly. God coldly said, but I am a light element God spirit. I cannot protect hell. The Book of Creation was speechless. God was right. From the moment God was born from chaos and darkness and determined to be pure light, he was destined to prefer light. This was unsolvable. The Book of Creation fell silent. After a long time, God's indifferent voice sounded in the great cathedral. I will think of a solution. But before God could think of a solution, the will of chaos acted first. She found Gu Xingyin. Gu Xingyin had a dream. For hundreds of thousands of years, except for a few times, as a powerful seraph, Gu Xingyin had never had a dream. She dreamt that she had arrived in a strange space. It was empty and quiet. She couldn't see the end or the end. However, it made people feel very peaceful. Suddenly, a woman in black appeared in front of Gu Xingyin. What surprised her was that other than her black hair and black eyes, this woman was exactly the same as her. Who are you? Gu Xingyin asked. She could feel that this woman was very powerful and had no ill intentions towards her. The black-robed woman looked at her with a smile. Who am I? Feel it. Gu Xingyin closed her eyes. She could feel a very intimate aura from the woman. This feeling, she suddenly opened her eyes. You are the will of the world, or should I call you chaos darkness? The woman was still smiling, and her voice was very gentle. There's no difference. Gu Xingyin didn't have any ill feelings towards this world's previous incarnation. She asked, why did you suddenly appear in my dream? The chaotic darkness looked at her with a mysterious smile on its face. Let me return you the identity you should have. Gu Xingyin had a bad feeling. What do you mean? 4 chapters today. I'm so tired. I won't update today. In the next few days, I'll make up for the 4 chapters 10. Good night everyone. Chapter 1841. Gu Xingyin's heart trembled. She had always known that she was different from the other seraphs. Chaotic darkness looked at her and smiled. It seems that you also know something. Gu Xingyin didn't say anything. Chaotic darkness looked at her with a gentle gaze. Carrie, you should be my child. Gu Xingyin looked up at her. Chaotic darkness' gaze seemed to contain countless things. She sighed. When God created all things in the world as chaotic darkness, my mission in this world had already ended. But when I saw God's light attribute, I had a bad feeling in my heart. Chaotic darkness didn't have any negative emotions when talking about God's gaze. She was like a mother who could tolerate everything, slowly recounting the events of the past. The God of creation shouldn't have such an obvious attribute deviation. As the only God in this world, he should have universal love, but he couldn't do it. The 7 days of creation ended. When my consciousness was about to enter the world's law, I seemed to have seen the future of this world. Gu Xingyin couldn't help but look at chaotic darkness. Chaotic darkness softly said a few words. Light and darkness are out of balance. The world will collapse. Gu Xingyin's heart trembled. She wanted to tell herself that this was all fake, that this strange woman who looked exactly like her was lying to her. But her reason told her that chaotic darkness wasn't wrong. The light and darkness of this world was indeed out of balance. Especially, under God's intentional or unintentional connivance, this imbalance and the gap continued to widen. If this situation continued, chaotic darkness words weren't completely alarmist. Gu Xingyin thought so in her heart, but didn't show any emotion on her face. Chaotic darkness couldn't see what she was thinking, so she could only continue. You should know that 7 is the limit. In this heaven, there should only be 7 seraphs. You are the extra 1-inch. Gu Xingyin finally responded. So? Chaotic darkness said. So Carrie, you are not a seraph created by God, but the last gift I, chaotic darkness, left to this world before I merged with the world's law. Gu Xingyin's heart trembled. Her heart was in a mess. Chaos darkness stopped talking after saying that. She was not in a hurry to wait for Gu Xingyin's reply. Gu Xingyin was silent for a long time before she suddenly asked. So what are you here for? What do you mean by returning something that belongs to me? Chaos darkness smiled when he heard that. In her opinion, when Carrie asked this question, it meant that her heart had been shaken. She said, naturally, I want you to return to where you belong. She looked into the endless void space, unable to see the end. Carrie, you know about hell, right? That's where you should be. You were born to be the king of hell, not to stay in heaven and be an awkward seraph. After she finished speaking, she looked at Gu Xingyin expectantly. Gu Xingyin's lips curled into a smile. She looked at the darkness of chaos and spoke word by word. You're lying. Chaotic darkness was stunned. Gu Xingyin said calmly. Maybe it's true that the light and darkness are out of balance, and maybe it's true that I'm not created by God. But chaotic darkness, was I really created by you? Chapter 1842. She pointed at herself and said calmly, if I was really created by you, chaotic darkness, then how do you explain my strong light attribute? Chaotic darkness was speechless. She obviously didn't expect Carrie to be able to think so calmly after hearing such shocking news. Gu Xingyin was right. If the 8th seraph was created by chaotic darkness, then when she was just born, chaotic darkness would have given her the dark attribute for the balance of light and darkness that she spoke of. In that case, Carrie couldn't have stayed in heaven, let alone become the 8th seraph of heaven. Seeing that his lie was exposed, chaos darkness sighed. You're very smart, Carrie. Gu Xingyin didn't take this compliment to heart. She opened her mouth and said, then can we communicate openly now? Chaotic darkness put away the smile on her face, and her expression became very serious. She said, then I'll tell you my purpose directly. Carrie, you need to fall. Gu Xingyin widened her eyes in surprise as if she had heard a very funny joke. The chaos darkness said to itself, I watch the birth of this world. I can't just watch it decline and die. God rejects darkness, but I, chaotic darkness. A cold snort suddenly sounded in this quiet space. Gu Xingyin felt her mind shake. She saw the black-robed woman in front of her turn into pieces with the cold snort and disappear without a trace. She suddenly opened her eyes. Gu Xingyin stood up from the couch. God's voice sounded in her mind. Carrie, come to the great cathedral. Gu Xingyin obediently changed her clothes and came to the great cathedral. God was still sitting on the throne. Almost every time Gu Xingyin came to the great cathedral, she would see such a scene. God opened his eyes and looked at the seraph standing respectfully at the bottom of the stairs. He was a bit angry, but not at Carrie but at chaotic darkness. God did not expect that chaos darkness would target Jialia. Suddenly Shen Tian paused. A fragmented memory appeared in his mind. It was Gu Xingyin who took the initiative to open her mind and spread out the memory in front of God. Such a frank and unreserved action warmed Deity's eyes. "You don't have to mind the words of chaos and darkness," he said to Gu Xingyin. Gu Xingyin asked doubtfully, "But God?" She wanted to say that the words of the chaos darkness were not all alarmist. But God interrupted her. "I'll take care of it." Gu Xingyin obediently lowered her head. "Yes, my God." God continued to say, "Don't worry. She won't have a chance to touch you again." This time, chaos darkness relied on the fact that it was now a part of the world's laws to take advantage of this loophole. After Deity came to his senses, he would never give her another chance. After Gu Xingyin left, the Book of Creation asked worriedly, "God, have you really found a solution?" Deity replied, "No." The Book of Creation was speechless. God closed his eyes. Carry alone is not enough to maintain the balance of light and darkness. And he wouldn't let Carrie fall. 2 more. 8 more. Chapter 1843. Just as God had said, from then on, Gu Xingyin never saw the chaos darkness again. Just like that, the days passed peacefully. Ordinary angels couldn't sense it, but a seraph like Gu Xingyin could. Heaven was as peaceful as before, but natural disasters started to appear frequently in the human world. Hell was also said to be restless. God summoned seraphs less and less. This was very rare. God spent most of his time alone in the Holy Church. Other than the seraphs, he almost never summoned other angels. But there was a big difference between rarely and almost never. All the creatures in heaven knew that God loved His Highness Lucifer, and Her Highness Carrie the most. But Lucifer hadn't seen God in months. Carrie was in the same situation. The seraphs were worried. Although it was said that in their hearts, God was omnipotent, and it was impossible for anything unexpected to happen, this situation was still very worrying. Lucifer gathered the other 7 seraphs for a short meeting. Lucifer frowned. "I'm worried," he said. He looked at Carrie. "Carrie, you're the closest to God. Have you found anything?" Gu Xingyin shook her head. Actually, the seraphs all knew that no matter if there was a problem or not, if God didn't want others to know, then no one would know anything. Gu Xingyin actually had some guesses. It probably had something to do with the balance of light and dark. She guessed correctly. Right now in the Holy Church, the thick Holy Spirit power was growing at a terrifying speed. God was still sitting on the throne. But if someone could see through the holy light and look at him, they would see that God was clenching his hands tightly. The Book of Creation's worried voice came from within. "God, are you okay?" No one answered. After a long time, God's indifferent voice slowly sounded from the Holy Church. "I'm fine." God opened his eyes. "Book of Creation, is it okay?" The Book of Creation suddenly flew into the air, and floated in the air. At the same time, the pages of his book flipped rapidly, and one scene after another was reflected in his eyes. God looked on expressionlessly until the pages of the Book of Creation finally stopped flipping. The great cathedral fell into silence. After a long while, the Book of Creation's voice sounded again. How could this be? God used his great power and forcefully used the Book of Creation as a medium to find a way to maintain the balance between light and darkness. In a sense, they had succeeded. This was because the Book of Creation really did reveal the solution. But the way to solve it, both the gods and the Book of Creation found it hard to accept. Deity closed his eyes. "Try again." The Book of Creation didn't say anything. Even a god of creation would have to expend a great deal of divine power to unleash such a heaven-defying divine ability. God obviously did not want to believe in that future, or rather, he wanted to find another way. But the result was still the same. The great cathedral fell into silence once more. "God." A gentle female voice suddenly sounded in this space. Deity opened his eyes. "Chaos darkness." Chapter 1844. Chaotic darkness, or perhaps it should be called the world's law now, did not show her true form. Her voice reverberated throughout the great cathedral. I told you a long time ago that the balance of light and darkness is out of balance. There will be big problems in the world in the future. You are confident of your ability. Now how do you feel? God said faintly. What do you mean? Chaotic darkness chuckled softly. It's very simple. I don't want to become the world's law. Now my consciousness is getting weaker and weaker. According to this development, maybe in less than 10,000 years, my remaining consciousness will be completely swallowed by the world's law and become a truly ruthless law. This is not what I want. In addition to this method, I have another solution. God raised his eyes and looked into the void. Although there was nothing there, his eyes accurately captured the traces of the world's law. Say it. The voice of the world's law flowed slowly in the empty great cathedral. Give me Carrie. God's pupils shrank. I can now think of a way to separate myself from the world's law. But my remaining consciousness needs a carrier. The body of an ordinary angel can't bear my power. Carrie is the most suitable. I won't swallow Carrie. I will merge with her. At that time, she will be the embodiment of chaotic darkness, the natural ruler of darkness. God said flatly, impossible. Chaotic darkness was a little surprised. Why? Carrie is not so important compared to the balance of light and darkness. And I'm sure this is the way with the least loss. However, God still had a cold face. No. Chaotic darkness seemed to want to persuade him. God, think about it carefully. This method, God said in a cold voice. I know your plan. The so-called merge? Carrie will become a second personality at most. If your consciousness is more powerful, Carrie's body will be completely controlled by you. Chaotic darkness stopped talking. She did have selfish motives. It was much better to have a perfect body than to worry about the world's law swallowing her all the time. She did plan to merge with Carrie's consciousness. But if Carrie was too weak and swallowed by her during the merging, it would be out of her control. God saw it clearly. Chaotic darkness left. God summoned Lucifer. Lucifer heaved a sigh of relief as he walked out of the great cathedral. No matter what, it was great that God was fine. Gu Xingyin also found a pleasant surprise. The system was back. Hearing the sound of the tablet again, Gu Xingyin suddenly realized that she missed it. Where have you been all this time? She asked. The system replied. When this world was being transported, there was an accident with the world's laws. After the system sent the host into this world, the host was lost in the chaos. Speaking of which, it was all thanks to Gu Xingyin that the system was able to locate the host's location. Gu Xingyin looked at the system. What's the mission in this world? The system replied. Due to a teleportation error, the host has become an existence that should not have been born. The mission objective of this world is judgment result. Prevent Carrie from falling. Never fall from heaven? Gu Xingyin was baffled. Based on her current situation, the possibility of her falling from the sky was extremely small. 4 watches. The night continued. Chapter 1845. Unless, Gu Xingyin once again guessed about the balance between light and dark. She had some vague guesses about this, but she wasn't sure. After thinking for a while, Gu Xingyin suddenly asked, System, is there an original plot in this world? The system shook its head. Gu Xingyin asked again, what about skill extraction? The system continued to shake its head. Due to the failure of the teleportation in this world, the host doesn't have the skill extraction. Gu Xingyin was speechless. So what should she do? The system continued. I can't appear frequently in this world. The God of creation is too powerful. I'm afraid that he can detect my presence. Gu Xingyin nodded in understanding. After a few words with Gu Xingyin, the system returned to its silent state. Gu Xingyin stayed alone in the palace for a while. She decided to gain God's favor. Although she was very sure that compared to the other creatures in this world, her presence was already strong enough. But who knew what would happen next? The system gave her the mission of not falling from heaven. Gu Xingyin had a feeling that things weren't that simple. Angels falling from heaven mostly happened because they violated the rules of heaven. Their souls were polluted and they couldn't stay in heaven anymore. Falling from heaven like this was mostly chosen by the angels themselves. Then, were there any who were forced to fall from heaven? Gu Xingyin thought to herself. She came to the door of the great sanctuary. God, she called out in a low voice. Carrie. God looked at the silver-haired seraph in confusion. Her face was still beautiful, but her expression seemed to be shrouded in a thin layer of blankness. It was rare to see Carrie like this. Gu Xingyin walked straight to the throne. God didn't stop her. Gu Xingyin walked to the throne with familiarity. Just like in the past, she bent her knees and rested her head on the god's knee. It was a very dependent and fragile posture. God, I'm very lost, she said in a low voice. Deity's gaze fell on her long silver hair. She wore a hair accessory that symbolized her status as a seraph. It was an exquisite gemstone hair chain, but it wasn't as dazzling as Carrie's. Deity did not speak. He waited for Gu Xingyin to continue. I don't know what I'm afraid of, but this place has always been very scary. She pressed against her heart. His head felt warm. Gu Xingyin raised her head in surprise. It was God who stroked the top of her head. God looked down at her and said, Don't worry, Carrie. I'm here. It was only a simple sentence, but Gu Xingyin smiled as if she had received a strong guarantee. She closed her eyes quietly. Being by God's side always gave her extra peace of mind. He actually fell asleep? A low voice rang out from the great cathedral. God didn't seem to think that an angel would fall asleep in front of him. He lowered his head and looked at half of Carrie's face that was exposed. Her calm expression was full of peace and trust. God looked at her face and was in a daze for a moment. Then he moved his fingers and prepared to put her somewhere else. But before he moved, the figure on his knee suddenly called out in a low voice, God. God waited for a moment, but he didn't hear anything else. Then he realized that she was just talking in her sleep. He was in Carrie's dream. This realization put the divinity in a good mood. Chapter 1846. But what happened next was beyond God's expectation. God moved his fingers, wanting to move Carrie to another place to rest. But before he could do anything, Carrie suddenly reached out and hugged his waist. God's body stiffened for a moment. It had been countless years since God was born. He had never had such an intimate moment with any creature. Even though this intimate partner was Carrie, whom he had always liked, God still felt very unnatural. He subconsciously wanted to pull Gu Xingyin's hand away, but Carrie was faster than him. The seraph, who was still in a sweet dream, leaned against God tightly. Her hands were around his waist, and the corners of her mouth were curled up. Obviously, the scene in the dream made her very happy. God lowered his head and looked at Carrie. His heart suddenly moved, and he stopped struggling. He moved his consciousness, and then he appeared in a bright sunshine. God looked around. This place was covered with green grass, blue sky, and white clouds. It looked like the human world. Carrie liked the human world? She had never been to the human world. Had she? God was a little confused. This was Carrie's dream. When he was about to pull Carrie away, God suddenly changed his mind. He suddenly wanted to see what the dream looked like that could make Carrie smile so satisfactorily. The scene not far away attracted his attention. The two tall figures were walking slowly on the grass, hand in hand. God moved his consciousness, and then he appeared in front of the two figures. With just one glance, he was shocked. The one on the right with silver eyes and silver hair, smiling happily, was none other than Carrie. God had never seen such a bright smile on Carrie's face. In God's eyes, seraphs should be perfect. So Carrie had always been reserved and polite in heaven. She always had a perfect smile on her face. God used to like that smile. But seeing Carrie like this, God realized that Carrie could be so happy. This lively Carrie was more real than the perfect seraph in heaven. And the figure on the left, God's eyes darkened. The man with silver hair down to his ankles and indifferent golden eyes. God had seen that face for countless years. It was impossible for him to be wrong. That was himself. Carrie was the only seraph who had seen the true appearance of the gods through the holy light. Staring at their interlocked hands, Shin Luo saw the tenderness and attachment in Carrie's eyes when she looked at him. He felt as if he had discovered something that he had never noticed before. Heaven forbade desires, and he had never thought about that. Since when did Carrie have such thoughts about me? God felt that he should be angry. He should be angry because he had been blasphemed. He should punish Carrie, who dared to dream of being God, and not let her off easily. But no, he was just shocked and intrigued. But there was no disgust or revulsion. Deity stared blankly at the two figures walking towards the setting sun, getting further and further away. He was silent for a moment, and his figure gradually turned into a shadow. At the same time, the god on the throne opened his eyes. Carrie was still fast asleep. A satisfied and happy smile still hung on her face. The god spirit looked at her with a complicated expression. Many emotions flashed through his golden eyes. In the end, he gently moved his hand and placed her on a soft couch in the great sage hall. Today's 6th update. There were 4 more updates in the evening. Please give me a ticket, awo. Chapter 1847. At that time, Gu Xingyin had no idea that her dream had been accidentally spied on by God. She was immersed in her beautiful dream. Speaking of which, the God of creation in this world had a divine body made of the purest light element in the world. No matter how one looked at it, it was perfect. Gu Xingyin looked at the expressionless God beside her. While she was satisfied with her sight, she sighed with emotion. Even in the dream, God had such a cold and unapproachable appearance. It was really it was hard to explain. She slept very well. The power of the Holy Spirit in the great cathedral was very strong. Ordinary gods and even seraphs might not be able to withstand it. But Gu Xingyin didn't feel anything at all. If one could withstand the power of the Holy Spirit, then the benefits one could enjoy would naturally be top-notch. Gu Xingyin felt that she was in a warm environment. It was as if she was lying in soft clouds. It made her want to sink into a sweeter dream. Fortunately, she still had a bit of reason. She finally remembered where she was. Gu Xingyin opened her eyes and looked around. This place was very familiar. In fact, after staying in Crystal Sky for hundreds of thousands of years, Gu Xingyin didn't know how many times she had come to the great cathedral. Of course, she was very familiar with all the decorations. She looked around and finally realized that she was in a side hall of the great sage hall. So, she had fallen asleep while chatting with God? God didn't wake her up and sent her to rest on a soft couch? Gu Xingyin didn't know what to think. She pursed her lips and smiled. She got up, tidied herself up, and walked toward the great cathedral. Sure enough, God still maintained the same posture, sitting on the throne. Gu Xingyin bowed her head and was a bit embarrassed. God, I was rude. She was talking about how she had fallen asleep in front of God. God's voice didn't sound strange at all. It's okay. Go and rest well. This probably meant that God didn't want to chat with her for the time being. Gu Xingyin quietly bowed to God and left the great sage hall. As soon as Gu Xingyin's figure disappeared, the Book of Creation flew up impatiently. God, what do you plan to do with Princess Carrie? As the accompanying artifact of the gods, the Book of Creation could see everything that the gods could see. In other words, the Book of Creation had seen Gu Xingyin's dream clearly. The Book of Creation understood God very well. It knew that God would not tolerate such things, so it asked. God was at a loss for words. He was stumped by the Book of Creation. To be honest, when God realized that Carrie had unusual feelings for him, he did not want to respond. He even pretended that nothing had happened so that Carrie would not panic. It had never occurred to him to punish Carrie for this. It wasn't until the Book of Creation asked this question that he reacted. Why was he so tolerant of Carrie? Was it because she was a seraph? But if it was someone else and he knew that Meta or Gabriel had such feelings for him, what would he do? God thought carefully. He was sure that if he knew that other angels had such feelings for him, he would erase their emotions and memories without hesitation, even if they were seraphs. Chapter 1848. In the end, Carrie was different to him. God stared at the space in front of him, lost in thought. The Book of Creation didn't get an answer. It stopped in the air, confused. It didn't understand. Was it difficult to answer the question it asked? God? It asked tentatively. God came back to his senses and said quietly, I won't see Carrie for a while. She's just lost. She'll come to her senses after the baptism of time. The Book of Creation was speechless. That was it. Was the difference in treatment so obvious? The Book of Creation thought carefully, and felt that there was something wrong with God's attitude. Compared to God's usual style, the difference was too obvious. The Book of Creation often saw things in the human world. The more it thought about it, the more it felt that God was a bit abnormal with Carrie. It asked cautiously, God, what do you think of Her Highness Carrie? God looked at it with indifferent golden eyes. What do you mean? He was impatient with this roundabout conversation. Seeing this, the Book of Creation went straight to the point. Don't you think that your attitude towards Her Highness Kalia is very strange? God, do you like Her Highness Carrie? God was speechless. He said coldly, I was born with a body of light. How can I have such a thing as desire? Book of Creation, have you been too idle recently? Is that why you're thinking about these things? The Book of Creation was speechless. Don't try to change the topic. I feel that your words have a hint of anger. But the Book of Creation didn't dare to say this. It closed its mouth, but it complained silently in its heart. It's fine if you don't admit it, but you're avoiding it. The Book of Creation could show all kinds of things in the world. In terms of theoretical knowledge, it could kill any existence in the world. No matter how it looked at it, it felt that God's reaction was very strange. It was like he was in love without knowing it. It wanted to remind God, but God seemed to dislike this topic. They couldn't communicate at all. So the Book of Creation had to give up. But anyway, you have enough time. If you want to avoid it, then so be it. The Book of Creation cursed silently, then closed its mouth and stopped talking. Gu Xingyin returned to her palace. She didn't think there was anything wrong with it. But soon, she realized that something was wrong. Under normal circumstances, the gods would summon her once every month. This was the first time after the creation celebration. In the 100,000 years since Gu Xingyin was born, she spent at least half of her time in the great cathedral accompanying the gods. Because at that time, she did not have a priesthood. But now it had been half a year since he last saw a god. She never received another summons from the gods again. This was very wrong. Could it be that God is angry because I slept last time? Gu Xingyin shook her head. No, God would not be angry because of this. Even if he did, he would show it on the spot. Then what had happened? Gu Xingyin couldn't figure it out. She decided to personally go to the Great Sage Hall and seek an audience with the gods. He went as he pleased. Gu Xingyin walked directly to the entrance of the Great Sage Hall. My God, Carrie requests an audience, she said softly. If God was willing to see her, she would naturally receive the message. If he wasn't, there was no response from the Great Sage Hall for a long time. 8 chapters. 2 chapters left. See you later, please vote. Chapter 1849. Gu Xingyin stood at the door of the cathedral for a long time. This was the first time she'd been rejected by God. In the quiet Great Sage Hall, the Book of Creation watched as the silver figure left in loneliness and sighed. God, do you really not want to see Princess Carrie? God's faint voice sounded. Wait until she gives up the thoughts she shouldn't have in her heart. The Book of Creation was speechless. Okay, as long as you're happy. Actually, Gu Xingyin wasn't as lonely as the Book of Creation imagined. She was just a bit confused. What had happened? Why did God suddenly not want to see her? It was the complete opposite of God's attitude toward Carrie. God continued to summon Lucifer at the usual frequency. In the eyes of the other angels, this phenomenon was that God was favoring His Highness Lucifer more and more, while His Highness Carrie was no longer as favored as before. During one of the seraphs' regular meetings, Gabriel asked Gu Xingyin worriedly if she'd done something to make God unhappy. Gu Xingyin was completely confused. She said hesitantly, Last time, when I met God, I fell asleep. Does that count? Gabriel was speechless. Yes, Princess Carrie, you're really amazing. When they met God, they were all very nervous and excited. They had to maintain their best manners at all times. This princess actually fell asleep. However, Gabriel thought about it and felt that with God's love for Princess Carrie, He wouldn't be angry over such a small thing, right? She looked at Gu Xingyin helplessly. I don't know either. Think about it carefully. After that, Gu Xingyin tried to go to the cathedral a few times, but every time, she was rejected by God. The most depressing thing was that once, she stood outside and watched Lucifer walk into the cathedral. After returning to her palace, Gu Xingyin asked the system gloomily, "Did I do something to make God hate me?" The system's white light flashed, indicating that it didn't know either. Gu Xingyin was still thinking seriously when Lucifer arrived. He had clearly just come out of the great cathedral, and there was a Holy Spirit energy that Gu Xingyin couldn't be more familiar with. He looked at Gu Xingyin's face with obvious worry. Jialian. Gu Xingyin bowed to him. Your Highness. Lucifer looked at her and hesitated. He had only vaguely heard that Carrie had not been summoned by God recently, but he never thought that things would be this serious. Not being summoned by the gods and being rejected were two completely different concepts. Before Lucifer left, he even took the initiative to say, God, I think I saw Carrie outside the great cathedral. However, the gods did not reply to him. Lucifer felt that the gods did not seem to be angry or disgusted with Carrie, so it was very strange. Gu Xingyin knew what he wanted to ask. She smiled bitterly and shook her head. I also don't know how I angered God. In other words, she also didn't understand anything. She looked at Lucifer and suddenly said, Your Highness, can I ask for leave? Lucifer looked at her in confusion. Gu Xingyin said, Since I was born, I have never left heaven. Can I go to the human world? Chapter 1850. Lucifer glanced at Gu Xingyin. There was no special expression on this companion's face, but Lucifer automatically imagined her sad face because of God's reaction. It was good to go and relax. Lucifer thought for a moment, and felt that there was no special problem for Carrie to deal with at Angel Academy, so he nodded immediately. No problem, you can play for a while. Gu Xingyin laughed. She was really curious about the human world in this world. This was a world where everyone believed in God. There were elves, dragons, and strange beasts in the human world. It should be a completely different scene from heaven. She stepped out of the moon through the transmission array. It was the first time she left heaven. Gu Xingyin stood in the void, looking at the holy gate of heaven with a slight smile on her face. Then she flew quickly toward the human world. In the great sage hall, a god and a book both saw this scene. The book of creation said, Her Highness Carrie has gone to the human world. God didn't have any reaction. With Carrie's strength, there was nothing in the world that could hurt her. As deity thought about this, he suddenly realized something. He wanted to distance himself from Carrie. Why couldn't he help but focus on her as soon as she left his sight? God's heart skipped a beat. He lowered his eyes and withdrew his gaze from Gu Xingyin. He had to get rid of this habit. Gu Xingyin landed in the wilderness. She used her divine sense, and the scene within a radius of 10,000 miles appeared in front of her. The next moment, she moved her feet and appeared thousands of miles away. This was a human city. Compared to heaven, which was exquisite everywhere, this city was so simple and crude that it was terrible. However, it was this imperfection that gave the city a sense of liveliness. Gu Xingyin walked into the city. There were many people in the city. Women with cloth wrapped around their heads walked hurriedly on the streets. Many young and old men were hawking on the streets. In front of them were simple handicrafts made by themselves. Gu Xingyin's arrival attracted almost everyone's attention. Even in heaven, which was full of beauties, only Lucifer could compare to Carrie's beauty, let alone in the mortal world. There was a strange silence on the street. Everyone seemed to be worshipping Gu Xingyin as she walked through the bustling street. Soon they came to their senses. Then Gu Xingyin found that the people here were too enthusiastic. The women wearing thick headscarves took off the beads on their wrists and handed them to her. The men handed over their most exquisite trinkets to her. Even the children carefully opened their hands to give her candies that they had treasured for a long time. Gu Xingyin was stunned for a moment. She had never thought that she would be so welcomed. Was it just because he was good-looking? She thought it was funny. But soon, she felt that it was a little troublesome. because she realized that her arrival seemed to have affected the normal lives of these humans. Gu Xingyin thought for a moment, and couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Her figure flashed and disappeared on the spot. Those humans were looking at her with admiration. Now that she suddenly disappeared, they were so excited that they shouted loudly. Some of the older people even knelt on the ground. In this era where the belief of the gods was strong, messengers of the gods were not rare in the mortal world. Obviously, these humans regarded Gu Xingyin as the messenger of the gospel. Update 10. Today's update is over. If there is time tomorrow, I will continue to update 10,000 times to make up for what I owe. Good night, everyone. Love you. At the same time, I would also like to ask for some tickets. Speaking of which, do the students have a holiday during the weekend? Chapter 1851. Gu Xingyin looked at this scene from afar and waved her hand. A rain of holy light fell from the sky and landed on the humans. Many of them felt refreshed, and the impurities in their bodies disappeared without a trace. Seeing this scene, they were even more convinced that the celestial-like person they saw just now was really an emissary sent by God. Gu Xingyin turned around and planned to leave. She realized that her appearance was not suitable to appear in an ordinary human gathering place. In the next second, her movements paused. The scene in front of her suddenly changed. The plains disappeared, the trees disappeared, and the road under her feet also disappeared. The entire space turned into a thick black color. And Gu Xingyin was the only ray of light in this thick darkness. Her expression did not change as she said coldly, "Chaotic darkness?" Other than chaotic darkness, she could not think of anyone else who could pull her into this foreign domain without her knowing. A soft laugh sounded. A familiar black figure appeared in front of Gu Xingyin. "Long time no see, Carrie." The black-robed woman who looked exactly like Carrie said with a smile. Gu Xingyin tried to break free from this domain, but helplessly found that it was useless. Chaotic darkness seemed to have discovered her purpose. She did not stop her and only said with a smile, "It's useless. This is something I prepared especially for you. Carrie, I have waited for so long. The day when you are not in the crystal sky has finally come. What's more perfect is that God's gaze does not fall on you." Gu Xingyin gave up on the idea of breaking through. She looked at chaotic darkness seriously and asked, "What do you want to do?" It seemed that chaotic darkness had been planning this for a long time. Chaotic darkness did not hide her purpose. "Of course I want to become one with you." Chaotic darkness, as the name implied, was the source of darkness. If Gu Xingyin really became one with her, her light attribute would definitely be devoured by the darkness. At that time, heaven would no longer be able to contain her. Could this be the reason why the system gave her the mission of not falling from the sky? As long as an angel was tainted by the power of darkness and evil, their core would mutate and their faith would be shaken. That was the beginning of their downfall. Seeing the obvious resistance on Gu Xingyin's face, Chaos Darkness was somewhat puzzled. "You seem very reluctant. So why not?" Chaotic Darkness said, "If you choose to fuse with me, with your strength and my attributes, the newly born Carrie will definitely be the most powerful king of darkness. No one can restrain you anymore, and God can't command you anymore. Isn't it much better than being a boring seraph in heaven?" Gu Xingyin lowered her eyes. "I was born with light, and there is only light in my heart." The Chaos Darkness stopped talking. In fact, she had seen the angels' firm belief in the light and the gods. She didn't understand at all what kind of thing faith was to make them so persistent. She felt that she and Carrie were at odds on these matters. Since that was the case, there was no need to continue the conversation. Since they couldn't reach a consensus, it was better to use their actions directly. The thick darkness pressed down on Gu Xingyin. Gu Xingyin's body lit up with a dazzling light, forcing the darkness back. Chaotic Darkness was surprised. There's actually such a powerful force. Chapter 1852. This was the first time Gu Xingyin had fully displayed her power. Chaotic Darkness was also shocked. But she was prepared. From the beginning, she had considered Gu Xingyin's power in the best possible way. Now, Although the power Gu Xingyin had displayed was beyond chaotic darkness expectations, it was still within her control. Gu Xingyin watched as the dark power slowly invaded her body. Pain. Extreme pain. Although her body was not a real seraph, it had been bathed in the light attribute since birth. After hundreds of thousands of years, under the baptism of the powerful Holy Spirit of the great cathedral, her body was almost comparable to a natural body of light. How did it feel to have a pure body of light forcefully invaded by darkness? Gu Xingyin felt as if her body had become a battlefield. The dark power from the outside world and the light power in her body were fiercely fighting against each other. So tenacious? Chaotic darkness looked at Gu Xingyin's body, which was so pale that it was almost transparent because of the pain, and a trace of confusion flashed through its dark eyes. Was it because of that strange belief again? She would rather endure such great pain than fall into depravity? System. Gu Xingyin gritted her teeth to maintain her clarity. I can't hold on any longer. Her tone was a little difficult. Tell me, what can I do to not fall? The system's body flashed with white light. Maintain your clarity. As long as your core is not contaminated, no matter what happens, you will not fall. As long as your core is pure, even if your body is burned by the light power, you will have a way to return to normal when you return to heaven. Gu Xingyin understood the system's meaning. Maintaining the purity of the core was to maintain absolute clarity in such extreme pain. Because once there was a flaw in her consciousness, she could be taken advantage of by chaotic darkness. Cold sweat dripped from the corner of her forehead. She could already feel the taste of blood between her lips and teeth. Gu Xingyin could clearly feel that her body was being burned inch by the dark power. In her consciousness, there was only rejection left. Rejection of all the dark power approaching. But it was so painful. God, why didn't you come and save me? You still refused to give up? Chaos darkness looked at the figure in front of him. It was already the 6th day. The silver-haired figure in front of him was already shrouded in a thick layer of black fog. Her body was completely surrounded by the power of darkness. However, the dark energy could only strut around her body. His eyes were still pure silver. Only when her core turned black and her eyes were stained with darkness could the fusion between them be considered a true success. Chaos darkness was a little anxious. She spoke in a low voice, and her voice drifted into Gu Xingyin's ears. What are you still holding on for? Carrie, you're in so much pain. Your God didn't even come. He gave up on you. Carrie, you're no longer pure. You belong to the darkness. These voices kept echoing in Gu Xingyin's mind. Her consciousness began to fall into a trance. The system panicked. It called out to its host again and again, trying to remind her not to give up. Gu Xingyin could no longer feel her body. Why hasn't God come yet? I can't hold on anymore. God, have you really given up on me? God. The pair of pale golden eyes on the throne suddenly opened. 2 updates are up. See you later. Give me a ticket after you finished reading. Chapter 1853. He felt inexplicably flustered. God had never felt this way since the creation of the world. What happened? God looked from heaven to the human world. Where was Carrie? He finally realized that something was wrong. He couldn't find Carrie. There shouldn't be any place in the world that the God of creation couldn't see, unless someone deliberately blinded his perception. The golden light in God's golden eyes soared, and his huge divine sense swept to every corner of the world. With just one glance, God was furious. Damn chaotic darkness. Chaotic darkness, who was waiting for Carrie to surrender, felt something in her heart. Oh no, God noticed it. She wanted to leave but she couldn't. God came to Carrie's side in an instant. His golden eyes widened, and he looked at the figure in front of him who was covered by the strong dark power in disbelief. Was this Carrie? God waved his hand, and a gentle golden light fell on Gu Xingyin's body. The layer of black fog on the surface of her body was all dispelled. Gu Xingyin half opened her eyes and tried to look at God. She opened her mouth slightly as if she wanted to say something, but in the end her mouth just fell down weakly. She closed her eyes peacefully. No matter what, God finally came. Deity reached out his hand subconsciously and held Carrie's falling body. With just one touch, he knew how bad she was at the moment. The dark power on the surface of her body was just a small matter. There was still a strong dark power raging inside her body. He temporarily suppressed the dark power, but he couldn't expel it in a short time. God looked at chaotic darkness with his cold golden eyes. For the first time, God showed his anger so clearly. Damn you! Chaotic darkness just looked at Gu Xingyin with pity. If God had noticed it a little later, one day in the human world would have been just a moment in heaven. She was so close. She was so close to completely merging with the body in front of her. But now, all her efforts were in vain. Chaotic darkness also knew that the silver-haired god in front of her wouldn't give her any more chances. She sighed and said, "I admit defeat, God. I should have died long ago, but I shouldn't be in your hands. You can't hurt me." As she spoke, her body suddenly turned into a cloud of smoke. The black illusion also disappeared in an instant, revealing the blue sky and white clouds that belonged to the human world. God did not move. He let the chaotic darkness leave. He knew very well that chaos darkness was right. He couldn't do anything to her. The current chaotic darkness had already completely merged with the world's laws. Unless he fought against the laws of the entire world, he would not be able to do anything to the chaos darkness. Even if he could defeat the laws of the world, it would be useless. The law of the world was just an emotionless law of life. Even if he were to kill it, the ones who would suffer would only be the living beings in the world that he had once personally created. This debt he would remember it well. God looked down at the figure in his arms. The next moment he appeared in the great cathedral. As the rich Holy Spirit power came rushing toward him, Gu Xingyin, who had been lying quietly in the arms of the god, suddenly began to tremble violently. It hurts, it hurts. The dark power, which had been suppressed by God, suddenly encountered such a powerful dark power. It seemed to have sensed danger, and started to fight back in her body again. It seemed to want to make a final struggle. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.